The attorneys working on the biggest cases aren't the ones who work the most hours. They're working on something different. And what is different is most lawyers never figure out what it is. You're handling cases, you're handling issues, you're handling stuff that comes up between attorneys. You're handling things that are showing up. The problem isn't your effort. The problem is where your effort is going every day. So I was 15 years old when I got a job at the Dolphin Shirt Company. And it sounds exactly like what it is. It's a shirt company. And I was 15 and wanted to get my first job and save up some money to try and help get a car. And that was it. And I remember getting the job, and I've been taught my whole life that you wildly overwork and deliver with everything you do. School, sports, job was no different. So I showed up at the job, and they basically walked me to a room in the back and said, here's your little station. And literally what I did all day, 5 days a week, because it was summer, was stand in one spot with rags and clean silk screens, which is what they press the ink through to make shirts. And that's what I did all day. I stood there and cleaned ink out of these things, and I'd finish one and put it to the side and get the next one and clean that. I showed up early. I worked late. I worked so hard that after about 6 weeks in the summer, they were running out of their giant backlog of silkscreen presses that they were using to make shirts. And so I worked full time until about 6 or 7 weeks into the job, and they didn't have enough work for me. And so they cut my hours in half. And I continued to work exactly the way I had been. And then they basically said, well, you finished all the things. Thanks for your job. We don't need you anymore. I basically worked so hard that I ran out of work to do. The owner then basically said, well, we don't have any more work for you. Good job. See you later. And that was it for me. I basically worked myself out of job because I was working so hard on what I thought was the goal, which for the company, great. But the thing that I took away, and the thing that I consistently think about now, is hard work doesn't always equal the outcome you want. Because I worked so hard, I basically lost my job. And it was phrased nicer than that, but like that's what happened. And I can remember telling my parents about it, and like, I worked so hard, I finished. But like it was silly looking back on it. And so I think about in law, this is even the next level, is in law, there's so much work to do because there's so much complexity that everyone is inherently, especially with the billable hours for the lawyers that do that, inherently everyone assumes that if you're busy and you're working hard and your day is full, you are the best at what you do and effort equals outcome. And that is not true. And so what I like to think about is, when we think effort equals outcome, that only works when it's very simple. And when you're a kid in school and growing up, and this is where we learn this, is it's like you work hard on the paper, you work hard on the math set, you work hard preparing for a test, and then you get in businesses or your law job or being a lawyer where the complexity algorithmically scales exponentially in a way that it's difficult to explain how many different options there are and how many different things you can work on. And we're always just like, oh, I have a gajillion things to do. I'm never going to be able to finish all my work. That's exactly right. And it's the reason that you see that one lawyer make the one phone call and all this stuff happens. And everyone's like, man, how do you do that one thing when been working on this for years? It's because they determined the one thing that is actually going to be able to make a difference for that case. It's something that I often will think of as, if you are going really fast, you got to make sure you're running in the right direction, because it's very easy to not be running opposite way, even though that does happen. And we all know lawyers that have done that, where they're doing exactly the opposite thing of they should be doing. Or if they take a theory at trial that you're just like, thanks, defense. Yeah, please do that theory. That helps me. Good job. So they're running in the wrong direction. It's because they haven't found the thing they really should be focusing their hard work and effort on. I know this because I review a lot of TBI cases. Like, that's what I do. Last year, I think we looked at 250 TBI cases for other law firms, not including our own cases. So we just were helping other lawyers across the country with their TBI cases. And the number of times I would see a file where what the lawyer thought was important wasn't important, and what was important they hadn't touched, they hadn't worked on, they hadn't gotten the right expert, they hadn't done any of the things necessary to move the needle in either settlement or doing a better job at trial. And it's a trap, because if you work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week and you're absolutely exhausted, it actually makes you feel like you're doing things. And even when you're doing all that hard work, you feel more productive than the results show. And this is why. And so let me give you another example. I had this case with this pressure cooker that exploded. A worker in a restaurant is standing over this pressure cooker and the pressure cooker explodes. The 3 different fail safes don't work. And the lid, which is, steel that's an inch or 3/4 of an inch thick, basically fractures, blows up, goes through the roof of the building, and in the process hits him in the forehead. He has a pretty significant TBI. And what happened in this case is you'd assume that great case, they're going to pay a lot of money. The defense basically took a tactic where our client did rehab, like post-acute brain injury cognitive rehab for like 9 or 10 months. And what ended up happening is he got significantly better through the rehab because he was working so hard. Like he didn't want to, he's somebody that's worked his whole life. He didn't want to not be able to work. And so he worked so hard learning basically how to use a cash register again, some basic skills, because when he went in, he couldn't do that at all. By the time he left, he could. And the defense took this position that he got better and therefore his long-term injury wasn't that significant because he improved so much, which is great and true. We spent a ton of time focused on the wrong thing in that case because what we really needed to do more than anything else is reframe the case to show what if he took all that hard work and rather than learned how to use a cash register again, learned how to do the next skill to get that much better at something else with all that hard work. And you can see it. You hear that and you're like, oh yeah, that is a big deal. And it's what I'm talking about is you give that type of reframe, that type of work on exactly what matters to the defense, and all of a sudden that case goes away. And that's what I mean by working on the wrong thing, is everyone would look at that case and assume that you should be focused on his initial injury or your experts or your reports or your art or all the other things you're working on, when the real factor is you need to meet the defense with what they care about and give them a frame of what they think their biggest defense is. And you do that, and it's almost like a bar graph where like, how much time are you spending on something that only matters this much versus how much time you're spending on something that matters this much. I like to always ask lawyers when they're like, I'm so busy, I don't have time to do anything, I'm just wildly overwhelmed. I'm like, how much time do you spend thinking about, are you working on the right thing? And I bet it's 5-10 minutes a week. And then they spend 70 hours working on the thing. They spent 10 minutes thinking about whether they're working in the right direction or not. It's insane, but it's what we've been taught because that's what worked for us in the past because everyone said, here's your assignment, here's your assignment, here's your assignment. Going through all of school till you get to the end of school, the complexity ramps up. You've got family, you're trying to exercise, you've got a zillion things trying to get your time. And then you don't have time to decide, is this the thing I should be working on? And that's the trap. It is making you run in the wrong direction. It's why I see TBI cases again and again and again focus on the wrong thing. When I get it, I'm like, you should be doing this. And the lawyer's like, oh yeah, I totally should be doing this. That's so obvious. And I'm like, well, if it's obvious, why haven't we done it? And it's because of the lack of thinking about what should we actually be working on. And so I like to call it the governing disagreement. That's the language I use internally for me and in my notes and with my office of what is the single thing that we need to really focus on that the defense doesn't get. And usually it'll end up being one thing. Sometimes we'll end up talking about what are the 3 governing disagreements. And the question I ask is, once you figure out the governing disagreement, what are the things the defense fundamentally disagrees with you on? How much of your work is being done to change those things? I know this because I talk to lawyers all the time. I have proof. It's usually none. And that's what you need to change. You need to figure out what the problem is in your TBI case and then figure out how to spend effort, time, money, resources, expertise solving those problems. You will get wildly better outcomes. And I'm not saying, hey, additional 50 grand here. You'll get 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x the value of your case doing that. And it's that simple. So before you go into your next deposition, even your next trial, you need to go figure out what's the governing disagreement. What are the things we disagree on? And is the work I'm doing aimed in the right direction? Because you don't want to fall in the trap of effort equals outcome. It doesn't. It's focused effort equals outcome. Thanks. This is Taylor Ernst, TBI Lawyer Secrets. See you next time.